YouTube, it's your boy, Stevie Blunder, also known as Stefan Lamb, also known as the greatest duelist of all time, professionally signed Yu-Gi-Oh player to Luxury Gaming slash Playmakers. I'm not sure if the first one is actually true. I think we're like a subsidiary. I'm not sure. But anyways, I am here to share with all of you guys my knowledge. If you want to catch these segments live, be sure to follow me down below at twitch.tv/StevieBlunder. No underscore this time. No underscore this time. We finally got it removed. And today, we've got the greatest segment of all time, one that I'm sure a lot of you guys have struggled with. It is side decking. So, we want to get into the main points of today's lecture, of today's School of Duel. Chapter 1, we're going to be talking about the purpose of your side deck. Chapter 2 is going to be what cards you should be putting into your side deck in the first place regarding matchups and your deck. And in Chapter 3, I want you guys to sort of understand what cards to take out and how many. So more of like the math/ratio aspect, as well as like what you should be taking out. So, what is side decking? For those of you who don't know, when you build your deck, you're going to have your main deck and your extra deck, but you also have your side deck. And this side deck is a pile of 15 cards, and between games 2 and 3, you sort of access it, and you're able to interchange and swap cards between this pile and your main deck. So say that I have an Ash Blossom in my side deck, and I have an Alistair the Invoker in my main deck. I can take out one Alistair, put that into my side deck, and put in the Ash Blossom. But no, you can't just put in like 15 cards from your side deck and then just like, haha, I have nothing. You have to end with 15 cards in your side deck as well. And this is arguably one of the most underrated and important parts in all of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! I think this is a part where a lot of people will just sort of autopilot and sort of like, oh, I'll just put in these cards for this matchup, these cards for this matchup, and that'll kind of get you there sometimes. But I think that if you're trying to like actually like hyper improve and get into this game extremely competitively, that it's not the best way to approach it. Because at minimum, 50% of your games are going to be played with your side deck. Because even if you get 2-0'd or 1-0'd, or even if you get 2-0'd or you 0-2, even if you 2-0 someone or you get 0-2'd, you are going to be accessing your side deck for one of those games. And even if you consider game 3, that's a 66%. That's a 66% of all your games are going to be played with your side deck. 2/3 of all your games. That's a lot. And I think a lot of people, they just sort of look at their side deck and just like, oh, this is just like, oh, my deck loses to XYZ card. I'll just put in this card. Which is kind of true, but I don't think that's the correct way to approach deck building. So, oversighting and the bike theory. Oversighting is sort of be careful not to overside. Oversighting is where you side excessively to the point where your deck's overall consistency and engine suffer as a result. How we can avoid oversighting, we'll get into it later on in the lecture. But right now, just take into consideration, do not overside. Do not side in like 50 fucking cards. Taking out like redundant, excessive cards for side deck cards is fine usually, and taking out key engine cards and ones that are necessary for your game plan usually aren't. Like taking out fucking the Gem Knight Garnet for like Imperial Order in your Brilliant Fusion engine obviously isn't the best idea, because you're just going to kill some shit. Because you're killing an engine, like entirely. But if you're taking out cards like Terraforming, you're taking out maybe like your 4th, 5th, or 6th pot of like whatever. Like if you're playing like Extrav and whatever. Like if you're taking out like cards like Rhoda, Called by the Grave, just like random dumb shit that like you realistically won't need, and overall are just like very small consistency boosters, then yeah, those cards are usually pretty fine to take out. A good analogy that Farfa made actually was that side deck cards are like stabilizers on a bike. They're like the training wheels of the bike, not the bike itself. Do not hurt your main engine and the overall consistency cards of your deck to like such a degree where you're just putting like 80 side deck cards. So, chapter 2. What should you put in? What should you put into your deck? The easiest question is to just analyze the meta. Overall, your side deck will be primarily geared towards answering the best decks in the format. Who would have guessed put cards in side deck that beat good deck? Usually a lot of these cards that I am describing are cards that aren't really great to put in your main deck, but are kind of like silver bullets against some of the best decks in the format. And just because your deck has a bad matchup against a certain deck, doesn't mean you should always dedicate slots to it. Balance justified fear for a deck versus the realistic probability of you playing or not playing that deck over the course of an event. So I guess a good example would be, let's say you're scared of BA. Let's say your deck has an unwinnable matchup against Burning Abyss for some reason, and you want to play you just want to play Shadow Imprisoning Mirror. Well, while you're considering Shadow Imprisoning, that card will just win you the game against any BA card, against any BA. Like you will just win. But the issue is, do you think going into an event you are realistically going to play BA? Do you think going into the event you're not going to play BA? And if so, if your deck is really that bad against it, like even so, even if your deck is an auto lose against BA, do you really think that the likelihood of some of you playing against BA over like a 4 to like 7 round event is realistically like at a local, or maybe like a 7 to 8 round event at a regional maybe? Do you think where the pool could be even smaller BA players, do you think that you should put it in? That's up to you, but just be sure to balance that fear versus just actual rationale. And overall, just like as a general side deck tip, your side should ideally be able to handle meta threats, as well as be able to apply to tier 2 or even rogue decks as well. Rogue, playable, whatever, same difference. Just because some decks are less common doesn't make them non-existent. So I guess a good example of a card that handles meta threats as well as rogue decks is like Nibiru. Nibiru's a very good card. Like Nibiru hits Drytron really well. Nibiru hits Drytron extremely hard, but also hits like a shit ton of rogue decks. Like there's like 5 I can name off the top of my head, like Light Sworn, ABC, Cyber Dragon, maybe, I'm not sure. There's a lot of, like, usually you want cards with general purposes. Keywords usually. What should you put in your side deck in? What should I put in my side deck then? Big think. And again, ultimately, it always depends on your deck. And each deck has really specific strengths and weaknesses. Build your side accordingly based on what meta matchups you are expecting, as well as what your deck is struggling against. But again, balance that fear and rationale. Don't side extremely one-sided like Silver Bullets. Like you're gonna put in fucking like Imperial Iron Wall against Ritual Beast, like because your deck loses because you're playing Necros and you lose to Ritual Beast. You can't do that. It's just really bad too. Like Zodiac may have a great Sky Striker matchup because they can just like, you know, make Zeus. Striker does literally nothing. But they may struggle against like Dragon Link. Build your side deck accordingly to counter decks that your deck is absolutely worst against. Take into account how your deck naturally plays. Speaking of naturally plays, I just realized this is kind of like all over the place, but like fuck it, whatever. Here's some of the types of cards that you can side. They usually fall under one of these three categories. So we got some generic overall good cards. These are cards that are just generally good. They're really good cards. And they'll just hit a lot of decks just by their card design. Hand traps card like Ash Blossom, Gamma, Valor, Imperm, you know, stuff like that. Removal and board breakers. Maybe stuff like Evenly Matched, Forbidden Droplet, Lightning Storm, Twin Twist, or Cosmic Cyclones. You know, stuff like that. Like Dark Hole even. Raigeki. Like these are all like really specific. These are all like very generically good cards that they're never gonna be bad. Like they're just gonna be. You'll always find a use for them, assuming you draw them. Specific blowouts. These are cards that are a bit less generic. They're a lot less generic, but they can win games on the spot against like certain decks. So I guess like a really great example would be like targeted hand traps. Cards like Nibiru, like you won't like when you look at the metagame right now. Like there's Dragon Link, and then there's. I'm trying to think of another one. Like there's Dragon Link, maybe Phantom Knight, like Nibiru, which is like extremely good against those decks, but what might be awful against Nibiru, but what Nibiru might be like really shit against is like Zodiac or like Sky Striker. Same with like Droll and Lockbird. Like it's gonna hit some decks, but not every deck. It's gonna hit 2 decks like extremely well, like Drytron. Like it cannot play, but they also just, you know, whatever. Lancia, etc. And Blind First Tools is the third category. This kind of falls under the specific blowouts category, but this is more like for going first. These are ultra specific cards that out other ultra specific cards. The most side deck cards can't really handle. These are cards that like are pretty generic in like their application, but they only really have good purpose going first. Like when you're going blind first, you're going like. You're putting in maybe cards like a Pointer of the Red Lotus, Solemn Strike, Solemn Judgment, Solemn Warning maybe even, Solemn Scolding, and Floodgates. There's even like Royal Decree, Imperial Order, Anti-Spell. These are cards that are all very good, but not every deck can necessarily justify playing them game 1. Like if I'm playing Dragon Link, I can't really justify playing 3 Anti-Spell game like going first. Like if I draw it in my combo, it's really good, but if I don't draw it, but like if I draw it and I don't, but like it's not necessarily Anti-Spell is going to be great against every single matchup. because it's ultra specific. But when you're going to game 3 and you're expecting to go first because you lost game 2, and you're expecting them to have cards like, okay, they're gonna put in Dark Roar, they're gonna put in like Forbidden Droplet. Those are situations where cards like Impure the Order and Anti-Spell can be justifiably played in, because the odds of you playing against those cards within the main deck is much, much more higher. Games 2 and 3, we were just talking about this. If you're playing a combo deck, overall you should gear your side deck to either the possibility of having to go second with cards like Hand Traps or Equalizers, or you can overload on being able to go first for cards like Solemns and Floodgates. Is also another option you can take. Like I said, if you're playing like Spiral, cards like Anti-Spell and Pure Order, those are really good cards in the side deck. Because those cards kind of counter the main deck. Other side deck cards, as well as just like Solemn Strike and something like Tri-Brigade. You're able to just have an extra level of interruption in an already extremely consistent deck. If you are playing a blind second deck, like Mech Knights, the reverse applies. Plan for going first. Cards like Artifacts, Solemns are also just very good for the side deck, because people will usually try and make you go first if they feel like you're on a blind second strategy, because your blind first strategy will be a bit less optimal. So kind of have that band-aid solution. Here's a little side note. I want you guys to side for your locals. Always side for the event you're going to. Although online events, or just like events in general, like YCSs, regionals, whatever, can give the impression that certain decks are the most common and most prevalent decks in the format, be sure to take into account the locals meta at smaller events, or at like your literal locals. So like here's an example. Like say where this format where Drytron is the best deck, but your local is heavily populated by a Subterra and Altergeist player. It might be a bit better, like if 85% of your locals is like Subterra and like Altergeist, it might be a lot more better to just gear your side deck towards like 9 to 12 copies of just like Lightning Storm, Hatrunade, Cosmic, like Twin Twist, just like all these cards that are just extremely good against those decks. And maybe just like 3 to 6 slots for like Drytron, or like an extremely powerful meta deck, like a Silver Bullet or something. Yeah, that's like just one way how you can build a side deck if you're going into an event and you already sort of have prior knowledge regarding the card pool or decks that are being played. Chapter 3, what to take out. So, your game 2, you're in the side deck. Game 2 or 3 in the side deck. Here's a little order of operations of what you should take out. If you want anything to take away from this, screenshot this right now. Cards that are worthless / serve little purpose within a matchup. These are cards that are literally worthless within a matchup. Take these cards out first. Like Gamma against like stun deck. Like obviously, what fucking monster effect is stun activating? I don't know. Thunder King Ryo, negate your tanky. I don't fucking know. I don't know how Thunder King Ryo even works. Cards that serve little no purpose based on whether or not you're going first or second. So Cosmic Cyclone is a pretty bad card for going first usually. Mirror Force is going pretty bad for going second, and Mirror Force is pretty bad for going second. These are just like cards that they're really good. Like they're good cards, but based on whether or not you're going to go first or second, you kind of just have to take them out and just like accept that you're not going to really be able to resolve those cards, because those cards are sort of designed for going first or second. Or second and first in regards to Cosmic Cyclone and Mirror Force in this instance. Third order of operations. Cards that are excessively redundant. These are cards like Rhoda, Reborn, excess copies, and like excess extenders. Maybe like the second Gearfried, or maybe the second or third copy of like of Red Layer and Infernal. Like cards that aren't really necessary but are just nice to have overall. In regards to just like slight consistency boosting is always really nice, but that's just the society that we live in, unfortunately. Fourth, cards that serve good purposes, but other cards fulfill their place just better. This is like where we're getting to like the really nitty gritty of like when you're getting into like the 9th to 15th card of like shit you're siding in. Like let's say you've already sided out every single thing, and like you want to put in Droll for some reason. You haven't put that in first, but whatever. Like if you're against Drytron and you have DD Crow in the main, like DD Crow is really good against Drytron, but Droll is just somehow 10 times better than DD Crow. Like holy shit, ban Droll. But yeah, like that's an instance where although DD Crow is an extremely good card in that matchup, you might have to take it out for just a card that is just much better. It's like trading in $100 for $1,000, you know? And finally, these are like consistency slash engine cards. These are cards that like you realistically never want to cut, but you kind of have to. Like when you're getting into that literal 12th to 15th card. These are cards like Fossil Dig and Lost World and Dino, but realistically, you will never reach this last step. This is just in some fantasy scenario where you're like trying to side out just everything. Because you just have like 15 hand traps in the side, and you're just like, oh, alright, I'm against like fucking like Dragon, Cock, Goki, PP, Poo Poo. And you're just like, bah, 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 bah. I gotta put in like 20 cards, or I'll lose. But I have 15! Alright, we're gonna talk about the math. Am I talking about? I lied. We're just gonna generalize it. So, although this is a mainly introductory course, the math of the matter is that usually anywhere from like 3 to 9 cards is typically sided. Usually 6, 3 to 6. 9 is like maybe like 15% of your matches you'll side in 15 cards. Anything beyond that is like a 1%. It's like a 5% chance at best. Of your like 0 to 5% of your matches, you will side in more than 9 cards. It's extremely unlikely you'll ever get to that point. But usually between matches, you'll get 3 to 6. Maybe 9. But usually it's because of this sort of ratio side in. Wow, that was a sentence. But usually anywhere 3 to 9 cards, usually typically sided in because people play cards in playsets. And that is just, people play cards in playsets of 3. And that makes for the most easy siding. So let's say I have 3 Ash Blossom in my main. I'm against stun. I'm going to take out 3 Ash Blossom, 1, 2, 3, for 3 Lightning Storm on the side. 1, 2, 3, boom, easy swap. Like all of them are out. I see the most. I can see this the most often in my opening hand. Very, very nice. Now, again, although siding cards in is important, but if you're excessively siding, you're going to see your side deck way more than your main deck and be in a bad way. You're going to see your side deck more than your main deck in like the worst way possible. Like you could just see like maybe like 4 hand traps and like a field spell that doesn't do anything. Like 4 hand traps and Lost Roll. Unless that hand trap is like specifically Nibiru, then you're going to be in a pretty bad spot. Again, side cards are the stabilizers, not the bike itself. Siding patterns. Due to the nature of how, again, we're sort of still in the math area, due to the nature of how certain cards work in conjunction with your deck, as well as the ratios of which you play them with, they can kind of have weird amounts of cards being taken out and having to put back in. So, cards that are not always the easiest to side out, even though you want to side them out, are cards like Psy-Frame Gamma, where you have to play like 4 cards instead of just 3. Cards that are limited, like Imperial Order, Called by the Grave, Going First Garnets, like Windberry Statue, these sort of cards that you can't really always 100% cleanly side out, because you can't put in you can't take out 1 Windberry Statue for like 3 Nibiru. But that doesn't make these cards bad, however. Be sure to take into account how you want to side deck build so that you're able to sort of side out as many useless cards as possible with the proper fill-in space. So this is like getting into like the really nitty-gritty of how side decking is built, but words. But this is sort of like Gammas and Driver being taken out with 3 Cosmic plus a Heavy plus a Harpy's Feather Duster, or Call by the Grave, Imperial Order, and like in my Dino deck, like Call by the Grave, Imperial Order, and like a Dogoron being taken out with like a Pankratops, Mind Control, and like Mystic Mind against maybe something like, I don't know, what's the deck that loses to Mystic Mind? Dragon Link? I don't know. Like, those cards are pretty good. Not always good. And again, sort of build your deck with these sort of siding patterns in mind. What am I going to be taking out? What am I going to be taking in for this matchup? Like, how many cards do I want to side for this matchup? How many cards do I want to even side in general? Do I think I'm good? Like, just always be sure to have an idea of like what you'll be taking out when you're building your main deck, when you're building your side deck as well. Like, don't just put in 40 cards in your main deck and say, oh, this should be good enough. Take into consideration what you're going to be taking out in certain matchups and what you'll be putting in. So, these are the core lesson concepts that you should be taking away from this. Understand whether or not you're going to be blinding first or second, and build your side deck accordingly, as well as the type of deck that you're going to be playing. Are you going to be leaning into the blind first by setting in floodgates and strikes, or do you want going second insurance, like with cards like hand traps, dark lure, etc., etc., etc. Be sure to build your side according to what you're expecting for an event, as well as how your deck plays overall, as well as just be sure to look at the math. Blah 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 blah. Do not overside. Please don't overside. If you really have to, like, You can, but holy shit, you should never have to side in more than 9 cards, unless you're like in dire straits mode, and just take bad card out, but good card in, easy though. And yeah, that's gonna be the end of lecture 2. Remember, please be sure to like and subscribe, and follow me on twitch.tv/Stevie Blunder if you're not already doing so. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you next